The First Baptist Church of Long Beach is one of the oldest established churches in the city, its history dating back to the late 1800s. In 1866, Rancho Los Cerritos was sold to the Northern California sheep-raising firm of Flint, Bigsby and Company for $20,000. In the 1870s, as many as 30,000 sheep were kept at the ranch and sheared twice yearly to provide wool for trade. In 1880, Bigsby sold 4,000 acres of Rancho Los Cerritos to William Wilmore, who subdivided it in hopes of creating a farming community called Wilmore City. He failed, and he was bought out by a Los Angeles syndicate which called itself the Long Beach Land and Water Company. They changed the name of the community to Long Beach, which was incorporated as a city in 1888. The town grew as a seaside resort and then as an oil and navy and port town. The town was once referred to as Iowa by the Sea, due to the large influx of people from that state and other states in the Midwest. Huge picnics for each state were a popular annual event in Long Beach down at the pier. Every great work of God starts with the burden of a man. In the case of the First Baptist Church of Long Beach, that man was J.C. Allaire. Mr. Allaire and his wife came to Long Beach in December of 1893, when the city was scarcely more than a village, and found no Baptist organization of any kind in the city. In fact, out of the 654 people in town, they found only 6 other Baptists. Desiring to have a Baptist church in Long Beach, the Allaires invited these 6 people to their home for a prayer meeting. This prayer meeting was the seed from which the First Baptist Church of Long Beach was to be developed. The prayer meeting turned into a Sunday school. Mr. Allaire was chosen as the Sunday school superintendent, and Matthew Pickles Hall on the southeast corner of First and Locust Avenue was rented for $5 a month for 1 year. Pastor C.W. Gregory, who was missionary pastor in Compton and Gardena, came to preach on Sunday afternoons. Alfred Owens, the first person who joined the church by baptism, had the responsibility each Sunday afternoon to drive his horse and buggy halfway to Compton, where he would meet a member of the Compton church who had brought Pastor C.W. Gregory thus far on his journey. After the services, Mr. Owens would return the pastor to his home by the same method. In all, this trip consumed nearly 4 hours of time. Then on May 20th, 1894, 15 people organized the First Baptist Church of Long Beach. Dr. Daniel Reed, a pastor from Los Angeles, preached the organization sermon. The following covenant was adopted. We, the undersigned Baptists, do hereby enter into covenant with each other that we will use the talents and means that God has placed or may place in our hands for the purpose of organizing and maintaining a Baptist church in Long Beach. March 3rd, 1895, Reverend S.S. Fisk was called as pastor. The church was still meeting in Pickles Hall, but it was outgrowing it rapidly. The church rented the Henderson Hall, located above the Stevens hardware store. The only stairway to the hall was in the rear of the building, but so many people found their way to the church that it was urgent that the church find more room. This time, the members decided to erect their own building. Pastor Fisk succeeded in buying property on Locust Avenue between 3rd and 4th, and in March of 1895, under the direction of Pastor Fisk, the church built their first building. Pastor Fisk was the head carpenter. The groundbreaking ceremony was a memorable occasion, since this was the first building that the young church would call their own. The new building was dedicated in July of 1895. After 2 years of faithful service, Pastor Fisk resigned the church, and after a few months of supply preaching from Reverend J.H. Storms of Los Angeles, the church called Reverend H.M. Bell as pastor in June of 1897 at a salary of $500 per year. Pastor Bell resigned after a little over a year of service, and the church called Dr. B.A. Kopass. The struggling church could not afford modern conveniences available at that time, and the church recommended that they should give up on the idea of endeavoring to have electric lights and instead should purchase a few more kerosene lamps. On October 22, 1899, E.H. Brooks was called to be the pastor of the church at a salary of $400 per year. He led the church to purchase a larger building from the Methodists. It was located on the corner of 4th and Pine and was purchased for $3,000. Frank L. Norton was called as pastor in 1901. It was under his leadership that the church grew so much that a building committee was appointed to look into building a larger building. Then in 1906, the next pastor, J. Lewis Smith, boldly led the church to build a new building. The building on 4th and Pine sold for $20,000, and the land on the corner of 4th and Locust was purchased for $11,900. This would become the home for the church for the next 44 years. The cornerstone was laid March 4th, 1906, and October 1st of that same year the building was used for church services. Pastor Smith served for 5 years and resigned to become pastor of a church in Pasadena. George Lehigh was called as the pastor and served for 1 year until he became the missionary pastor of the State Baptist Convention. In February of 1912, Dr. George Knights became the pastor, and for the next 15 years the church increased both numerically and spiritually. Dr. Knights led the church to greater heights in many areas. The West Side Mission was started. The East Side Mission was started and became Emmanuel Baptist Church. A Sunday school building was built in 1921 to the south of the existing church building. A dream of Dr. Knights was to balance the church budget with the missions budget. In 1913, for example, the total church budget was $11,000. $6,000 was for the church, and the missions giving was $5,000. He led in starting the Virginia City Church in 1924. The next pastor was Dr. Ralph Jensen from Chicago. He would lead the church for the next 10 years. These were very difficult and trying years for the church and for the nation. He held the church steadily during the Great Depression. He was also the pastor during the terrible Long Beach earthquake of 1933, which did much damage to the church building. So much that the church could not use the building for over 7 weeks afterwards. During this period, the church met in the old Egyptian theater, just south of the church on 4th Street. The bell tower of the church was destroyed and never rebuilt. The picture shows the church building before the earthquake with the bell tower in place, and the picture below shows the church after the earthquake with the bell tower ruins removed. God truly sent this strong, steady man to lead during these tough times. On March 1st, 1939, the beloved Dr. Winfield Edson was extended a unanimous call to become the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Long Beach. His ministry was marked by keen fiscal management and a sharp spiritual desire for growth in the church. The church celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1944. He led the church to retire the mortgage, freeing up the church for future growth. His desire was like that of Dr. Knights in that he wanted to see the church budget and the missions budget balanced. The church grew quickly under Dr. Edson's leadership, and people were being turned away from the full building on Sunday mornings. In 1947, an architect was hired to draw up plans for a new building on the corner of 4th and Locust. A building fund was started and grew to $200,000 in 2 short years. City building restrictions and the shortage of parking availability, however, led the church to abandon the plans for this new building and look for a different location. A survey was taken on how people came to the church. It was discovered that 656 people came in cars, 475 people rode city buses, and 291 people walked, thus leading the church to stay in the downtown area of Long Beach. With money already in the building fund, a large piece of property on the corner of 10th and Pine was purchased for $137,000 cash on May 13, 1948. The church hired an architect and decided that when the money on hand reached $250,000, then the work would begin. A scale model of the new church was made and placed in the front of the church for the people to see the vision of their new building. In May 1949, the church building on 4th and Locust was sold for $225,000 with the agreement that the church could continue to meet there at that location for 1 year rent-free. To meet city requirements and to avoid taxes on the property while under construction, adult classes met on the construction site each Sunday until the building was finished. Just prior to the building's completion, the church met on the property and placed a time capsule in the cornerstone of the new building for future generations. Construction was completed 1 year after the architect's plans were drawn. the First Baptist Church of Long Beach met in its new building for the first time on October 1st, 1950. The building was completed at a cost of $967,000 with all the furnishings. 2 services were held for the grand opening of the new church, 9 o'clock in the morning with 1,712 in attendance, and 11 o'clock in the morning with 1,648 in attendance. An open house that afternoon from 1 to 5 p.m. drew 5,000 visitors. 6 years later, Dr. Edson made plans for a Sunday school edition and started having fundraising dinners with all the adult classes for pledge commitments. In 2 short months, they brought in sufficient pledges for the announcement to be made by Dr. Edson on a Sunday morning that the pledges were enough to proceed with the construction plans. Unfortunately, Dr. Edson suffered a heart attack in his study before that Sunday morning service. Dr. Edson improved from his heart attack, but was able to be home within 30 days and was writing letters to the people through the Beacon, the church's newsletter. He announced to the people that he expected to return to the pulpit in May for limited services, but the people were encouraged and approved the building plans. Their hopes were dashed, however, and shock spread through the church family when Dr. Edson suffered a second heart attack and passed away on April 18, 1956. Dr. Frank Kepner was called to be the pastor, and the church continued on. Under Dr. Kepner's ministry, there were several highlights. In January 1959, the church started having 2 services on Sunday morning. The first bus was purchased in September of 1960. The Spanish ministry was started in 1966. In 1968, a major remodeling of the auditorium and air conditioning for the entire building were the key projects. The church celebrated its 75th anniversary. Dr. Kepner's ministry continued for a total of 23 years, making him the longest tenured pastor to date. Mark Bubeck was the co-pastor along with Dr. Kepner for 3 years, helping to transition from Dr. Kepner's 23 years of faithful service to the church. Hans Finzel was the interim pastor for approximately 1 year, committing to help the church until another pastor could be found. In September 1980, Dr. Larry Chappell became the pastor, and in 1983 led the church out of the American Baptist Convention, which was becoming liberal. Under Dr. Chappell's ministry, the church became even more an international ministry. Dr. Chappell came to Long Beach after serving as a missionary in Korea, and with a heart for the Korean people, he started the Korean ministry by hiring Dr. Kim in 1984 to be the first Korean pastor of the First Baptist Church. The bus ministry grew rapidly, with the church having 13 routes. First Baptist Church School was started in 1987. Fundamental Baptist Bible Institute began in 1991. The Filipino ministry began as well during this time. In 1992, Mark Chappell became the pastor. The church was drawing heavily from the naval bases in Long Beach, but as a part of the downsizing of the military at that time, and with no warning, the church lost 300 families during his first 3 years as pastor. Every aspect of the ministry was affected, as deacons, choir members, Sunday school teachers, bus workers, and nursery workers were being shipped out to other parts of the world. At one point, almost 2 families were leaving each week. Some highlights from these years are: the Cambodian ministry was started, capital improvements to an aging building were accomplished, including a new air conditioning for the auditorium at a cost of $100,000. A Sunday school class for the homeless was started. The church celebrated its 100th anniversary in May of 1994. James F. Allen became the interim pastor in May of 1999 during a difficult transition. Brother Allen continued to faithfully preach the gospel each Sunday, and many souls were saved and baptized. The deacons, meanwhile, were searching and praying for God's will concerning a pastor. Brother Allen presently serves as an assistant pastor, school administrator, financial manager, and a very valuable asset to the church family and his pastor. June 4, 2000, Pastor John Wilkerson became the 18th pastor of the First Baptist Church of Long Beach. The Sunday school has grown from an average of 776 when he came in 2000 to an average of 1,768 for the year 2008. The church operates 13 bus routes, averaging 520 riders each Sunday, and supports 364 missionaries worldwide. The First Baptist Church of Long Beach is not a building or a program. It's not property or assets. It's about people History. The word history is actually two words, His story. The history of the First Baptist Church is God's story of how He worked through and uses people to accomplish His work. As we learn of the great accomplishments of the pastors and the people of our church, may we ever keep in mind it is only through God's power that anything is accomplished for Him.